So here's the deal. In your brain, in my brain, in everybody's brain, two main things we want to talk about. The one down at the bottom right there, something called the amygdala, a small almond-shaped organ, okay? The seat primarily, there's no exact spot, but the seat primarily of your emotional decision-making, the amygdala. And then there's the prefrontal cortex that makes logical thought processes, okay? The long logics type stuff. Both of these can be involved in decision-making. But here's what happens. Here's what happens to every one of your clients and you when you have to make a decision. And how many decisions do you make a day, do you think? God knows. I have no idea. I read a stat the other day. We make over 210 decisions every day about what food we're going to eat, okay? Whether we have the muffin or this coffee, that 210 decisions on the food you're going to eat. So think about all the decisions your clients are making when they're eating, then they're running a business, and then they're trying to run their financial affairs. Okay, tons of decision. But what happens is this. So you're sitting there, there's some external stimuli, whatever it is. A thought, an argument you're making with them, anything. It goes, all of it goes. Every external stimuli goes into your amygdala. Goes there first, okay? Then what can happen at the amygdala? Either a decision can be made right off the bat, an emotional decision, boom, I'm going with the Egg McMuffin or something like that, and then boom, the decision is made on an emotional basis, based on prior history and their experience. Or, what can also happen, if it's a decision that takes more logic and reasoning behind it, information is sent to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex does some real work, some reasoning, some calculation, and it sends back a message, again, back to the amygdala, and a decision is made. Now, the issue and the reason we have fatigue is this work up here in the prefrontal cortex, it takes effort, real, live effort, okay? It depletes the body of glucose. It is actually a muscle that's being used, so to speak, okay? So every time somebody has to use their prefrontal cortex, they get tired. So if you use it repeatedly and repeatedly, and you're asking them to do that, they just get more and more tired, and they just get more and more fatigued, and what they want to do is just shut off their decision-making. And that is very, very dangerous, because they're deciding not even to listen to you. So this is what it's all about. Getting tired by having too much work being done up here, or there being sort of a disconnect, like a conflict between how I feel emotionally and what the reasoning is telling me. When there's a problem there and it's going back and forth between there, then you've really got a problem. So we're going to say, don't address your client's fatigue by dealing mostly with the prefrontal cortex and giving them more and more logic with regards to what they should do. Deal with them on an emotional basis first, because all decisions are made emotionally. I'm not saying emotional basis only. That would be wrong. There are some concepts you have to go with your clients that are they're detailed. They're complex. They need to go to the prefrontal cortex. But you need to spend time helping them get ready emotionally for those as well. So what does it mean to you? This is what my people put together, but I like it. If you want to get to your client's head, aim for their heart first, which I mean is go emotional first, then deal with the logic side of it. And we're not all wired that way. I know I'm not wired that way, or wasn't originally. I used to go to logic to begin with, right? I used to go to logic even when I had an argument with my wife. I didn't deal with it on an emotional basis. I'm trying to logic to solve the issue. It doesn't work that way. It never works that way. We want to have it work. Now, when is it able to make a decision? If we want the amygdala to do more work, or at least to be connected and in harmony with the prefrontal cortex, when does the amygdala work? When the concept you're talking about with your client, it's emotional, resonates with them, it's familiar, uncomplicated, and clear. That's when the amygdala can do it itself. The prefrontal cortex has to get in when there's low emotion involved. It's unfamiliar, complex, and confusing. Now, where does most financial stuff sit? Where does it sit? Depends on what you're talking about. But there's a lot of stuff that you have to do with that's in here, right? Your job, and I tell you what, I don't envy you your job. Okay, I deal pro to pro in my life. Okay, I don't talk to civilians a lot. I do seminars for civilians, for your clients, but I don't talk to civilians a lot. That's your job. But so your job now is to either do two things. Is to do things here that provide them with stuff that is just familiar, uncomplicated, and clear. And sometimes you can do that, but other times you have to give them stuff that is very complex and can be confusing. And then it's your job to make it less so. Because I tell you what, every time something is like this and has to be pushed here again and again and again, more and more fatigue sets in. So what is our job to do? Our job is to make everything either emotional or at least not just emotional, so that these two groups are in harmony, so they fit, so that when somebody starts to reason, they don't go, oh, I was thinking that way, but I feel this way. You want them to do both the same. And there are ways you can do that. There are strategies you can use to put these two things in harmony, and that's what we want to talk about today. First of all, let me just ask you a question. Here's just some covers from Time magazine. And let me just ask you a straight-out question. You can see them all there. The crash, is the U.S. going broke? How bad is it? Never going to retire? Bankrupt? Would you show those covers to your clients? Yes, no? Yes? No? Depends. Absolutely it does, okay? Let me ask you the same question. All I'm going to do is add the dates. Would you now show those to your clients? A little more or a little less? Tell me. Tell me. Yeah, a little more, because it gives us some perspective in there, right? And you're going to ask them to think, well, that was in the past. You've been seeing all this bad stuff forever. This is bad media hype, right? But I'll tell you what, if you think about just what you went through, the difference between this, which is purely emotional, and this, and actually sometimes they do it without the things in the same order, you have to think a little bit more. This is a harder decision to make. Maybe I will show it to them now because it shows context. It shows different years. It shows it's always been this way. But the point is, it takes more effort, but it's the emotional side that normally drives everything. The emotional stuff goes through first. So that what causes this fatigue that all clients are going through? Excessive processing in the prefrontal cortex, too much time spent really on logic, and then a clash between these two. People feel a certain way, and they're being asked to think another way. Very, very difficult for them. So, what do we do? How do we reduce it? What's our ultimate goal? We want them to follow your advice. So, what are the objectives that we think you should be doing? Maximize decision-making in the amygdala, in the emotional side of their brain, or make processing in the prefrontal cortex, where they're doing the logical work, make it easier by making it in harmony with the amygdala. And I'll tell you what, let me give you some strategies to do that, okay? We're going to call these things primers, because you're really priming your client. And it's just like a coat of paint you'd put on a wall before you prime. It just makes the paint easier to stick to the wall, makes it last longer, makes the color more beautiful. Okay, so what are some of the primers that you as the professional can do to get people emotionally primed to take your advice? Emotionally primed to make decisions when they're tired of it. Well, first thing before I go any further is I want to make very clear that the primers that we're talking about here, and we're going to discuss them, it's not about any sleight of hand, it's not some trick, it's not manipulation of your client. There are people, unscrupulous advisors we heard about earlier, that do that. There are ways, we are programmed in certain ways as human beings, and I could train you in these, that you could do certain things and the client will then respond instantly on it. That's not what this is about. That's not what's right for your client. That's not what you want to do. What you want to do is prime them so that once they feel a certain way about what's going on, they have more trust, they have more ability to follow your advice. There are some books out, and there's some great books on this. Robert Cialdini wrote a great book called Influence, and it talks about certain things you can do to prime people, and I've used some of his research. But they all make the same point. It's not about any type of manipulation. There are books out there that are about manipulation. That's not what this is about. We are assuming that advisors are doing this in the best interest of their clients, and they can make some shortcuts by doing it this way. And every client's going to be different, right? You could have a client A and move them up from down to low, or you got a client B who's not that fatigued and move up. People are going to be at all different levels on this, and primers are going to work on a different degree each of them. But let's talk about the primers themselves. I built a house here to talk about the primers. You want to have some emotional response up there. You want an emotional response that is either, yes, I'm going to follow what you do because I trust you, and emotionally, I'll go with your decision. Maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. Or you want them to be emotionally ready to go through the logic with you, so when you walk them through what we were talking about, how complicated GMWBs and some of the guaranteed product are during the break, if you want to walk them through that very difficult process, they are emotionally ready to do it. Now, there's 4 primers I want to talk to you about. There's a leadership primer. As I said, you're the pro in the relationship, you provide the leadership. And we'll talk about some things around leadership priming, the authority primer. There's stuff around relationship. People want to deal with people they trust. You know this, but a relationship primer can get people emotionally ready to work with you better and help you make decisions with you better as well. There's something we're going to call purpose primers. Ton of research being done right now. And what it's showing in general is that optimistic people, and all of us fall somewhere on a scale of optimism, optimistic people are more successful in life, and especially more successful around investing in financials, because they are able to take more risks as long as they are measured. So we want to do some things to get people not to be overly optimistic, but to be optimistic about the right things in life. Another great book I would suggest you read and or even give to your clients is a book called The Rational Optimist. I'm sorry, I can't remember the author right now. The Rational Optimist. And all it talks about is not weird exuberance and be optimistic about everything, but rationally, why should we be optimistic about what's going on in the world? I think that's a discussion we should have with our clients all the time, because the more optimistic we make them, most of the clients, the better off they are. And then there's something around spirit, around purpose, around the hope for a better future. We'll talk about that. And again, back to the Greeks, we talked about logic and emotion. We're saying we've got to start with the emotion, then go to logic. But the other thing they talked about is about authority. Authority is very, very important to human beings. And I don't want you to ever think about abusing the authority you have, because you have authority with your clients, and you've earned it. But it is very, very important to human beings. Case in point, anybody heard of Stockholm Syndrome? So what is Stockholm Syndrome? Stockholm Syndrome is, I guess, because somebody got kidnapped in Stockholm. I haven't done the research on it. I guess I should. So when people get kidnapped, let's say they take a bunch of us, we're at the bank. Bad banks, right? We're at the bank. You should never go to your bank. Here's another reason. We're at the bank. Guy walks in with a gun, takes 5 of us hostage, and they're going to hold us till they give them all the money and they give them the helicopter to get out of town. Well, what happens is we hate the person, but then as we spend more time with that person because he has the authority or she has the authority because they have the gun, we start to love that person. We start to defer to their decisions. We start to identify with them, and if it's a guy, half the girls are writing him after they take him to prison, offering to marry him. Okay? That's what we are so wired for authority that we defer to it all the time. That's a good thing in our business, but it's something we should take with respect and honor it. All right? The other one, I don't know if you've heard about this study, is what they did is they got a bunch of just normal people off the street. They put them bring them into a lab. It's at a university, so there's some authority. Guy in a white lab coat sits them down and says, okay, there's some people behind the screen over there. They're wired up to electrodes. All you have to do is push this button, and it's going to give them a mild to not mild shock. We want you to keep doing that until we tell you to stop. We're doing some stuff here on motivation and things like this. Please continue. So they start buzzing, the person mild, and then it gets really bad where the person's screaming. The other person on the other side, another human being, is screaming. They're looking right at him. It's just a glass wall. The guy in the white lab coat is standing over top. And please continue. 68% of the normal human beings continued to press that button as a person on the other side screamed and then lapsed into silence. Do you think you'd do that? I don't know. 68% of us did. Why? Because the person in the lab coat over here, which is just your blue jacket turned white in the lab, right, is telling them to do that. We are wired to listen to authority. Don't abuse it, but I'll tell you what, use it for the best uses of your client. Activate their respect for authority and experience. Use it to your advantage.